Welcome, everybody, to the Perimeter Institute here in Waterloo, Ontario, for the first of 3 programs we're going to do here that tap into the global conversation about what it will take to make modern, reliable energy accessible to the billions of people around the world who currently don't have it. Tonight, we start here at home. More than half the communities in Canada, you may not be surprised to hear, that are not connected to the power grid are Indigenous. They're very often remote, some facing heartbreaking challenges made even worse by energy poverty. Joining us now for a look at the energy challenge for Indigenous communities here in the province of Ontario, we welcome Isidore Day. He is Ontario Regional Chief for the Chiefs of Ontario. Judith Sayers, former elected chief of the Hupachassath First Nation in BC, now a professor at the University of Victoria Faculty of Law. Cynthia Wesley Eskimo, Vice Provost for Aboriginal Initiatives at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay. Christopher Henderson, President of Lumos Energy and a clean energy advisor to numerous Aboriginal communities in Canada. He's also the author of Aboriginal Power. And Mitchell Daibo, Secretary-Treasurer at the Casablanca Lake Community Development Corporation. And I would ask our friends here in the Mike Lazaridis Theatre of Ideas to welcome our guests here to Waterloo today. Thank you. Just let me add my words of welcome as well, everybody, particularly Judith. You came all the way from British Columbia to be with us today. Thank you so much. Let's just put some facts on the table here that will sort of set the table for our discussion to come. Sheldon, if you would, this graphic, please. There are about 300 communities in Canada that are not connected to the North American electrical grid, and of those 300, 175 are Indigenous communities, many of which rely on diesel generators for their power. 25 of those off-grid Indigenous communities are here in the province of Ontario, to which Chief Day recently said, our people are living in substandard living conditions. We need to bring our communities into the 21st century. Substandard is not a standard that we can live with any longer. Chief Day, just before I pose my first question to you, let us acknowledge that we are here on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee people, this being the Haldimand Tract, so we acknowledge that for everybody in this audience and for our viewers at home as well. What relationship do you see between the living conditions in off-grid communities and the lack of reliable energy?
Well, Steve, thank you for having us, and thank you for having me. I reflected on this some weeks back, and I looked at the issue of water, for example, and what water is to the human body. We know that that's what electricity is to society. And we're now seeing more and more, as you indicated in your opening remarks, that many communities that are Indigenous are in fact living without electricity. And again, to the common person that lives in the mainstream that have maybe second, third generation access to electricity, they don't know the current struggles that are being faced in the north. Today, for example, we're still reeling from the fire that took the lives of 9 people in Pikangikum First Nation, one of the remote communities. And one of the central issues and causes is the fact that they're not on the grid. They don't have electricity.
I'm going to go to Cynthia on that very case. In Pikangikum, for example, they get their power through diesel. How does that affect the community, the fact that they have to get their power from diesel?
Well, it affects it greatly. I mean, one of the things that we were trying to do after the coroner's report came out was to actually get water to the communities inside the houses.
This is the coroner's report on
Pikangikum in 2008. And when we actually got them up there, the generators were too old to actually be able to accommodate that. So here we've got all of the facility to make it happen. The generators are old, they can't be replaced, and we are not hooked up to Red Lake, which is about 80 kilometers away. Why not? That's a big question I think that Canada has to answer.
We're going to explore some of those answers during the course of our hour tonight. Mitchell, let me go to you next. You live in one of those 25 off-grid communities, right? Where's Casablanca Lake?
Casablanca Lake is about 500 miles far north of Ontario. It's between Webequie and KI, or what's known as Big Trout Lake.
That's actually not going to help too many people understand where it is. Northwestern, northeastern Ontario?
Yes, it's northwestern Ontario.
Northwestern, so north of Thunder Bay.
That's correct.
How far north of Thunder Bay?
500 miles.
500 miles north of Thunder Bay. Okay, that's up there. How does your energy predicament affect how you are able to live your life there?
Well, being on diesel-generated power, at least we have a reliable distribution company there, Hydro One Remote Communities, that we work with. And what we suffer from would be blackouts, brownouts, and load restrictions. When the diesel plant is maxed out, there's no more growth in the community. Nothing more can be hooked to distribution. Like we were just on a period from 2007 to 2015. No new housing, no new buildings, no new anything. Yet the population growth continues, families are formed, and overcrowding continues. That's the reality of maximum capacity of diesel power.
Chris, you've looked at it in your book, Aboriginal Power. How does it affect people's lives across this country if they're off the grid?
It affects them in unique and powerful ways, negative ways. Socially, what it means, the community doesn't have the power for economic development. Jobs are hard to maintain or keep or even have. Socially, you have health effects where people are relying on diesel fuel for their heating and also diesel for their power. And as a result, you have indoor air quality issues, respiratory issues in that force. Economically, when you don't have that power, you can't offer a place where companies can get established because they don't know if the power is going to be on. As Mitchell indicated, if there's a load restriction, you can't keep your company operating, so companies don't get established. And environmentally, Steve, diesel fuel is really bad for climate change. It emits heavy greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a triple whammy here for these communities that is socially, economically, and environmentally very negative when you're reliant on diesel power.
We're going to talk about health impacts as well, which we have not referred to yet. But Judith, before we do that, I do want to get your sense of how it is in British Columbia as well. We've been sort of talking about Ontario examples up until now. How does it affect people in British Columbia?
The same way. There are many coastal communities that do not have access to the grid, many that are far away from the grid, isolated communities that you have to fly into, or there may be snow roads. But, you know, noise is one of those issues. I think that people have to live with a noisy generator, the fear of diesel spills into precious lakes or sacred sites, you know, and just feeling like, you know, you're living in a second-class conditions or third-world conditions. That why are you different than a community 100 miles down the road?
Well, let's try see if we can answer that question. Chris, again, working on your expertise on this, does this situation persist for technical reasons or political reasons?
The simple answer is both. If the political will was there, we'd probably solve the technical reasons. Generating power from renewable sources or sources that are off diesel is not easy to do. But the fact of the matter, it takes investment. Just like a lot of things in the north, investment's not there. Investment has not been there by and large to convert diesel communities to renewable energy or improve energy conservation and efficiency. So I think you need both. You need political will to move, and you need the technical will and the know-how to provide the solutions.
If you were able to bring those things to bear, how long would it take to kind of take some steps in the right direction?
A lot faster than people think. You can make a very quick impact in a year or two with many communities with improved energy management, community energy planning, and energy efficiency. And then over the medium term, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, look at where there are renewable options for communities and bring those online. If we bring the politics and the economics together, great things can happen.
Sorry, Chief Data, do you want to add something?
Yeah, certainly. I think the point is well taken. I think when we look at investment, I believe it's more than just the monetary sense of investment. And it's about the planning and ensuring that, you know, perhaps even the jurisdictional situation that exists in the south may not be the same that is needed in the north. For example, you have Attawapiskat First Nation, who right now has an energy through the Five Nations energy line that went up a number of years back. But what they don't have is they don't have access to the wealth that the diamonds are pulling out of the region. So this whole notion of exploitation policy that's been around for well over a number of maybe 60 years, you know, things have changed here in society, and you know, you cannot have the municipalized model in the north where First Nations are prevalent. What you really need to be looking at is how does the First Nation fix into the issue of jurisdiction? How can they take the wealth from the territories and actually build and sustain communities?
Cynthia.
And how, yeah, well, also, I think part of the problem that we have as a country is that we've never really recognized those communities the way they should have been recognized. They're, you know, they established artificial communities, and they've said, you know, these people have to live up here, and they're not a part of Canada in the same way that everybody else is. We managed to populate this entire country from east to west. There's absolutely no reason we can't go north to south as well. But
Professor.
we have to make sure that we bring them into the country.
Professor Sayers.
I just wanted to mention that Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, I guess Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada now, cut out their remote community program. And so BC Hydro did the same thing, although they have an obligation to provide service to everybody in British Columbia. So
What was
talking
that
about
program?
the remote community electrification program. So both of them, the federal government cut it and then the provincial government cut it. So no political will, no political finances. And then within the province of British Columbia, there's also a policy that you can't use new technology unless it's been used for 3 years, somewhere under 3 projects. And so if we wanted to bring in something like kite technology or something to these remote communities, unless it's been tested and tested the way BC Hydro likes it, we won't be able to use it. So we need change in policy. We need that political will to open up laws and policies so that we can bring power into remote communities a lot easier.
Cynthia, you mentioned the coroner's report a few moments ago, and I just want to do a quote here from Dr. Bert Lowers, the former Deputy Chief Coroner for the province of Ontario. He is the author of that 2011 Chief Coroner of Ontario's review of 16 youth suicides that occurred between 2006 and 08 in Pikangikum. He told us recently that Pikangikum's ability to evolve and develop is curtailed by the fact that they don't have this necessary resource. Having a good source of electricity is integral to having improved quality in their lives. Access to reliable and abundant energy. What would it mean for the day-to-day quality of life in off-grid Indigenous communities? Mitchell, why don't you start us off on that?
Well, we would be able to develop a local economy. I see electricity supply as an economic foundation to our economy, and without it, we're stagnant. So we create infrastructure, we create facilities, we create housing, but in doing all of that, we're creating jobs, we're creating opportunities, and we're also creating local capacity with the technology. We're not looking for solutions to be flown into us to become the beneficiaries of a solution that's foreign. We want to be part of the solution, we want to be engaged in the process, and we want to be seen as partners in finding solutions to meet our issues in our communities.
Chris, even in places as remote as Pikangikum, even in places that are so much further north than even most people down south even imagine, you think that access to reliable energy can have a positive economic development effect?
Absolutely, but let me give you an example. Atlan is a beautiful community in northern BC, just below the Yukon border. And there was one other ingredient you mentioned that you didn't mention that we need. We need political will, the technical know-how, but we need community leadership. In that community, the Taco River Tlingit First Nation, about 10 years ago, they said, could we replace diesel power with a small hydro resource that we have? And over the course of that period, they did that. It's been running now for about 3 years. 100% owned by the Taco River Tlingit First Nation. They built the capacity, they built their own ability to do it. In that time since they've had in the last 3 years, they've added about 20 jobs in the community, which is huge for a small community. They are stable, providing their own powers, reduce the electricity costs for the community. And they've seen the most important ingredient been added, which is confidence in the future, hope in the future. So the results speak for themselves. When you have a community convert from diesel to renewable energy, things get a lot better fast. I think we need to do more of that.
Cynthia, I'm going to push back on this because we even saw over the past couple of weeks Jean Chrétien, a former prime minister, a former Indian Affairs minister, a man who has adopted an Indigenous child to be part of his family, say sometimes these communities are not sustainable and you got to move. Are you saying that access to reliable sources of energy could actually be the secret to keeping places like Pikangikum and Attawapiskat alive and where they are?
It's one piece of the puzzle. It's not everything. I mean, there's a lot of insecurity up there, whether it's about food insecurity, health insecurity, energy insecurity. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed up there. But, Chrétien never lived in those communities, so he doesn't understand what the community is all about and how people want to stay. Those are traditional territories, ancestral lands. They shouldn't be required to leave. But we also know, because of what's going on in the north and the development that has to happen there, that also is, that's kind of the final frontier of Canada's resource extraction and wealth. And there's a lot of people living up there that may be perceived to be somewhat in the way of that development happening. So we're not so naive as to think that, we just forgot to give you some power and we forgot to give you some, additional jurisdiction. We get that there's an argument here that has to be addressed by all of Canadians. We all have to agree that it's important for the Indigenous peoples of this land to live in the territories where they've lived for thousands of years, and they need to have the kinds of assistance that's necessary to make it possible. And thankfully, right now, we have a government that has said, yes, we understand and we hear you, and we're going to work with you, not against you, to make it happen.
Mitchell, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Jean Chrétien. He's an elder statesman in this country. But to come up with something like that is ludicrous. It's a non-starter. It's not a discussion we're going to have in our communities to ask us to cut our spiritual, our cultural, umbilical cord to our homelands and become exiles in our own country. That's ridiculous.
It sounded, I don't know if I'm reading between the lines here, Cynthia, but it sounded as if you were saying the white man is conspiring to deny us a reliable source of energy in order to get us off our land so they can have access to our resources that are in our traditional territories.
It's a thought.
So I'm not
And it's been there for a while.
I'm not reading too much between the lines there. That's what you're saying.
I think that the establishment of those communities has created a huge amount of damage. Those communities where they're actually sitting are artificial communities. That is not even the homelands where they would have lived if they had had the choice. They were moved there in the 50s, and they were displaced from their locations for the benefit and the convenience of the government. So we need to do it differently now. We need to recognize that.
Judith.
Well, in 1969, Jean Chrétien and Pierre Elliott Trudeau wrote the white paper, and it was with the assimilation agenda. Let's take the Indians and take them out of the reserve and put them into society. And that's the same thoughts that still is prevalent in the government. And we cannot be removed off our lands. And we have to work with First Nations to find access to the grid. Something as simple as education and having enough power to be able to educate our children is really critical to some of that basic foundations.
Let me pick up on the healthcare angle that we sort of touched on tangentially a moment ago, but let's hit it on the head now. Chris, getting these reserves, which are off the grid, which are depending on diesel right now in order to fuel their power needs, if you could somehow turn that around and have a much more sustainable form of reliable access to energy, what would that mean for the healthcare concerns of the people living in these places?
Most of these communities are in the far north of Canada, including Ontario. It's cold for a lot part of the year. When you talk about energy, you also have to talk about heat. So they use diesel fuel to heat their homes, or wood if it's available, often it's not, and they use diesel for power. If you had sustainable sources of power that could both provide electricity and heat, having a stable heat environment in a cold climate, you can understand what that means for your own health. And when you don't have it, you know how dangerous it is when you don't have it. In addition, if you're reliant on diesel for heat and power, you also have heavy air emissions that affect respiratory illness. If an individual child gets respiratory illness in the far north of Ontario, the cost of that to Ontario's healthcare system is $50,000, apart from the human cost of that child and their family. So if you're moving to a more reliable source of diesel, of renewable energy away from diesel, you have stable heat environments, stable power environments that also remove some of the emissions in the system, let alone the spills that occur from time to time in communities. You wouldn't tolerate this in a town like Toronto or Ottawa. Why would you do that for Casablanca or Bekendjigam?
Let me ask Chief Day. Wood stoves. A lot of communities use wood stoves in their homes in order to, get by. What are the health implications of that?
Well, obviously, it's first of all an air quality issue, and second of all, it's a safety issue. Again, Bekendjigam, this was a wood burning fire system in the home that just killed the fire that just killed 9 people. Obviously, it's a safety issue, and it's one where the means to actually go out and get firewood is still a primitive situation in the north, and it shouldn't be. This is the 21st century. Our communities that are in the north are struggling between two worlds right now. The traditional world and the modern world, where there's so much ambiguity there. Which way do we go? We have access to this, and we need education, we need employment, we need an economy, but yet the energy's not there. And the wood fire situation, I think people would be quite surprised that there are more fires that kill First Nation people in the north than the national average.
Let me do a follow-up with you on this. When you think about the basics that everybody needs to survive, housing, clean drinking water, access to plumbing, regular plumbing infrastructure, reliable energy can do what to address those three basic needs, in your view?
Well, obviously, again, the situation in Pekanjigam, there is no running water. 95% of the homes in Pekanjigam don't have running water. So therefore, you're not going to see a fire hydrant outside. The issue of education. This is one of the situations that we're seeing some progress in Pekanjigam, where they've got a school that has a capacity. It's going to be coming online in September. They can hold 800 students. They've got 3 principals, and it has its own energy source. So they are moving ahead, and there are positive things happening in Pekanjigam. But again, the central piece again is just like the human body has electricity in it, and if one part of the body doesn't have electricity, it's going to falter and it's going to die. It's the same thing as a community.
Mitchell, can we learn a little bit more about your community? You're 500 miles north of Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario. How many people live there?
There's approximately 1,100 people there on reserve. We're situated on a little island, which the community was forced to relocate to in the 60s from its traditional areas, where we had a community setting, and we still maintain it. We're a Cree community and very progressive in terms of addressing our issues directly and looking for solutions, looking for partners, looking for the resources we require to solve our own issues. Casablanca doesn't sit back and wait, that's for sure.
Is there anything under the ground where you are that could help economic development in your area?
Well, for sure. Geologically speaking, we sit in the Ring of Fire geological area that's been in the media a fair bit and on everyone's tongues pretty much.
So
And
chromite?
Pardon?
Chromite?
Chromite, vanadium, base metals, there's diamonds, you name it. As far as we're concerned, we want to be the lead in looking at mineral exploration or mine development. So when I talk about being progressive, we look at turning over a lot of stones in terms of power. We've done a lot of investigations in renewables, water power site investigations, rooftop solar installations on our water treatment plant where we have our highest loads, looking at the school next, solar farm where we would sell power back to the microgrid with our regulator or distributor. So basically, we're trying to take charge of looking after the challenges we have in our community.
Chris?
Steve, what Mitch underlines is the power of people in the north and in all Aboriginal communities. He hasn't talked about in Casablanca, where they tried a few years ago with the University of Waterloo, looking at renewable energy to create hydrogen for the community. There is a huge upswell of support and interest in Indigenous communities to not only solve some of their challenges, but also be active players in the development of a clean energy economy, which is not only relevant to their economies, but for our country and the world. There's no better action that we could take is to take that energy and go forward with the people who want to change their futures. And every time I work with Indigenous communities, I see time and time and time again.
What did I hear, though? I thought I heard something once upon a time, Mitchell, about your community where you had some economic development plan that you had to scupper because you just simply didn't have the access to reliable power to make it happen. Do I have that right?
There was a number of initiatives we looked at where we didn't have the power. We had small business centers planned for housing small business entrepreneurs, incubators, and Hydro refused to hook up anything or even entertain a discussion of hooking up anything. So a lot of our projects are on the drawing board. Now, we finally commissioned an upgrade to the diesel plant in December 2015. So now we've got another window of power, and I would say 5 to 7 years we'll be back in load restrictions, depending on how aggressive we are. So we can now unlock some of those opportunities in our community.
Chief Day.
Yeah, I think what Mitch underscores as well is the need to look at the particular region that is suffering without energy right now. And the biggest thing here is going to be what does the planning configuration look like for the future? Listen, it's not going to be as it is in the mainstream in Canada today. The North is in a very different situation right now. We've got climate change. The North, in which Mitch is speaking about, has got the second largest carbon sink in the world. There's a climate change, there's the clean economy, and there's resource extraction and development, but you also have underdeveloped communities. This is going to really take a focus in terms of what that political will is, and what is the sequential investment that's going to be needed over this political term, whether it be the federal, provincial, but we really need to look at planning very carefully.
Judith, if you could get everybody off diesel and onto something greener,
Yes.
never mind the health effects that we've talked about, talk about the environmental implications of being able to do that. What would they be?
Well, I think the environmental implications, of course, would be the immediate reduction of greenhouse gases, the noise pollution, any of the threats with transporting diesel, whether it's by water, by road, or by air. I think there's a lot of those environmental effects.
How frequently do we see spills of diesel oil?
We don't hear too many, but the threat is always there, especially those barging through the ocean. And so it's something that you think about all the time. But I'd like to add one more word to your clean, reliable, and I think that's affordable electricity. You know, we have a lot of homes in the north that are heated by electricity, and their bills are so high that they can't afford to pay them, and they end up getting power cut off. So whatever solutions we come up with, we have to have them that First Nations can afford, and with a large amount of unemployment in our communities, it's a real problem.
Okay, Cynthia, you wanted to add?
I just also want to come back to the social. I mean, these are communities, and I know that a lot of the representation these communities get in the media is that these people are all sort of in a bad way, and they're suffering, and all these problems are happening, and it's true. But there's also an incredible number of people living in these communities that are doing really great stuff, and I think that we really have to try to balance this conversation. It's not that we want Canada to feel sorry for the people up there. We're just saying, look, there's resource revenue sharing opportunities here. There's people living in these communities that are well educated and are going back and forth between two worlds on a regular basis, except they don't have what we have in the South. I mean, I live in Thunder Bay myself, but they don't have the opportunity to jump in the shower every morning and to give their kids a bath every night, and the water sometimes is overloaded with bleach, and so the kids get sores, and they don't have the things that we take for granted, and they live in Canada too, but there's a lot of people working on their behalf, and I think that I really want to make that plain, that there's like 1,500 PhDs out there that are Indigenous, and 8,000 master's degrees, all trying to put their energies to bear on solving this with their own communities. It's not that we're asking you to do this for us. I think that I want to be very clear about that. And I think that we have to be understanding and acknowledge that there's a huge history in this country that has had these effects, whether we go all the way back to contact, or we're looking at the residential schools, or we're looking at the 60 scoop and foster care and over incarceration. There's a lot of things that are going on that are actually associated to the social, to the justice areas, and to things that we are also at the same time embattled by. So energy is one thing, but boy, we have a lot of work to do as a country to make this right, and I think that we need to understand that we're also working very hard to make that happen.
Well said. I want to go into this audience. Theo, you ready for me now? Where are you? Here we go. Theo, Blackbird, John joins us here today as well. We're going to get a camera to come up here and get a picture of it. Just come a little closer to me if you would, Theo. First of all, can you give us an explanation of your name?
Well, actually, I'm from both sides of the creek. My father is German, my mother is native, so Blackbird comes from my ancestral homeland in North America, and John comes from my ancestral homeland in Germany and Switzerland.
Interesting. Okay. You're from where?
Walpole Island, unceded First Nation, the
Where?
Kejwanong territory, which is at the heart of the Great Lakes, actually.
Okay,
on the St. Clair River.
I was going to say, if you ask somebody from Sault Ste. Marie where the heart of the Great Lakes is, they'll tell you they're on it too.
Yes.
So,
True that.
so the heart of your Great Lake is where?
In between Lake Huron and Lake St. Clair.
Okay. All of what you're hearing today, any of this ring true for you?
Very much so.
How so?
A lot of the issues we face regarding access to energy in northern communities, we face the same issues even when we have access to energy.
And you're one of the southernmost points of Canada.
Yes, and we have access to almost all types of energy, and currently right now we have a natural gas pipeline coming into our community, which is going to offset the costs of propane. We will be saving approximately $200,000 a year on propane for our water treatment plant alone. So renewable energy has a really important aspect to all of our futures. not only does it align with our traditional values and beliefs, but it aligns with, ensuring the next 7 generations have a future, have a place to call home, somewhere to live where they won't get sick from the outputs of different industry and things we're interested in this day and age.
You're on the grid, yes? Your community?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's the cost of electricity?
Unfortunately, we are on an island, so there is a delivery charge. It's about 3 times higher due to the delivery charge alone.
3 times higher than
Than
what?
the town 10 kilometers away from us.
Huh.
Yes.
How do you guys deal with that?
Well, we have to make a choice whether we're going to pay our hydro bill or pay for food. And more often than not, we're choosing to feed our children. Yes.
That's pretty stark, Theo.
Yes, it is. Yes.
What do you see the options going forward?
Well, I see options going forward is hopefully we continue with the momentum we currently have. Right now, there was 16 projects in Ontario last year under FIT and LRP programs, and 13 of which had First Nations contributions on some level, partnerships. So moving into the future, about 2 weeks ago, the programs were released to the public. Last year it was 500 megawatts, this year it's 900, so the opportunity for partnerships is there again. Hopefully we become leaders and not just partners like working and building on a labor level, but also leading the wave. Now, when talking about leadership, we have people that are being educated, they're going to school, and they're going to come out and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Also, we need to acknowledge our leaders that have grown on the land and have those traditional values and beliefs instilled within them. Because right now in this day and age, in the world, and the direction we're heading as a species, and the direction we're taking all species with us, it's critical right now that we realize and we see and we understand and we move towards Indigenous beliefs and values from around the world. We incorporate it into our economic models. We incorporate it into our social infrastructure. It's mandatory that governments around the world seek our understanding, and we create the environment where we can share these things with each other.
Theo, we thank you for sharing your views with us today here in Waterloo, Ontario. Thanks so much. Theo Blackbird John. Okay, let me just do a little business here with the folks at home in case you've tuned in late. We are at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics here in Waterloo, Ontario to take part in something called the Open Access Energy Summit. Tonight we're looking at the challenge of getting reliable power to Indigenous communities, and our guests who have come from near and far here at the front of the hall from left to right. Mitchell Diabo from the Casablanca Lake Community Development Corporation, Christopher Henderson from Loomis Energy, author of Aboriginal Power, Cynthia Wesley Eskimo from Lakehead University, Isidore Day, Ontario Regional Chief for the Chiefs of Ontario, Judith Sayers from the University of Victoria in British Columbia. Let's continue on now. I want to, Sheldon, can we bring up this next graphic here, board number 4, talk about what's happening to get reliable electricity to off-grid communities. Here's some more info for you. The 2016 federal budget includes $11.9 billion in infrastructure spending over the next 2 years and $8.4 billion over the next 5 years to help bring about what they're calling transformational change for Indigenous people. In March, the Ontario government announced a $13 million investment in 2 initiatives to help Indigenous communities combat climate change, including $8 million to help switch from diesel. I want to ask our guests here at the front, Judith, I'll start with you first. Do you get the sense that the tide is turning in terms of getting off-grid communities into situations where they've got access to reliable, clean, affordable power?
I do. And I think a lot of this also comes from leadership around the world. You know, we saw it at the Paris Summit. Everybody came out making commitments to 100% renewable power in the world. If we don't act now and we don't act fast, we're not going to be able to survive. And I think that that political commitment at that level is good. So we're seeing it reflected here, but we may need more than what's been committed.
Let's see if everybody else is as optimistic. Chief Day, has a corner been turned?
I've got some conditional optimism I just want to point out here, Steve. I as well feel confident that there have been some moves made by both the federal and provincial government. But we recently signed a political accord last August with the Ontario government. The reason why we've done that, Steve, was because the real problem that exists is one of relationship. Where do First Nations fit in terms of the decision making, in terms of the ability to plan our own destiny forward? I need to highlight that we are dealing with one culprit here, and it's the Indian Act. This is Canada's apartheid. This is going to probably be the crux of some of the major challenges that are still going to exist and perpetuate if we don't start dealing with the fact that First Nations need self-government models. We need to be at the table, not after the fact. So, for example, in the COP21 and the First Ministers meeting that was taking place in Vancouver about a month or so ago, you know, yes, we're at the table, but it's somewhat an afterthought sometimes, and First Nations need to be part of configuring the way forward. And you know, exactly to the point that Judith raises, we're optimistic, but we need to go all the way in terms of where do First Nations fit in this country.
Cynthia, I want you to help paint this picture for some of our viewers who may be questioning why the existence of the Indian Act prevents Indigenous communities from having access to clean, affordable, reliable power. Draw that line for us, if you
Well,
would.
the Indian Act goes back to 1876, so we would call that a pretty antiquated document. Yeah. It has in it very little that actually supports the development and progression of Indigenous peoples anywhere, and we do have to either get rid of it and change it, or put in the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is ready to roll, and we need to replace that with that. We need to update it, and we're in 2016, and we're moving forward in a good way, and we need to have that gone. And I think I heard the Minister of Indigenous Affairs say that she's with that too. The Indian Act has to go. So I think we're heading in the right direction. Strike while the iron's hot. Let's get it done.
Chris, we don't want to leave the impression with our viewers that things are all horrible all over the place, unless that's the case. Is that the case?
No, it's not. And I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but I am realistic. And one of the reasons I wrote my book, Aboriginal Power, was to talk about the realistic. If we're going to address energy and renewable in Aboriginal communities, on-grid, off-grid, but particularly off-grid, we're going to need two C's. We're going to need community leadership. Community leadership has to drive this. And secondly, we need collaboration, which can be within Canada and globally. If we do that, if we create community leadership with the support of governments, and we collaborate amongst communities in this country and globally, then I will be realistically optimistic.
How many years you been on this?
Pardon?
How many years you been on this?
About 20 years.
20 years.
Yep.
Things have gotten better over 20 years.
They have gotten better, yep.
But
I want them to get better faster.
You want them better faster.
Yeah.
Mitchell, how about you? Where are you on this?
I'm optimistic as well. I believe we have the attention of both levels of government. I believe we have the attention of regulators. We have the attention of the capital markets through industry. And one of the projects I'm participating in from Casablanca's perspective is the Watenikaneyap Power LP, which is a transmission company, 20 First Nations owned. Mine is one of the 20. And under the long-term energy plan of Ontario, there's priorities in there for upgraded transmission, and we're going after those projects. The first one is a phase one, doubling the line up to Pickle Lake for Goldcorp. It's a Musselwhite mine to have reliable power, because they're starting to bulk up with diesel generation. So there's nothing stopping communities, and certainly not the Indian Act, from participating in industry sectors outside of the community, and that's what we're doing.
Do you have any guess as to when that power line will come to your community?
There's quite a few hurdles. We have industry partners, Res Canada and Fortis Ontario on our team, of course. We're doing all of the planning we need to do to get through the regulators and achieve leave to construct. The environmental assessments are going to be challenging. We're crossing homelands of brother and sister communities, and not necessarily all of them are on board, and I think that's going to be a hurdle.
Mitchell, this sounds like it's not going to happen tomorrow. Doesn't sound like it's going to happen 10 years from
Definitely
now.
not, but if we don't get started, it'll never happen.
Now.
But this project is a really important project for Ontario. It could take 21 of those remote communities, connect them to the grid. And I will say to Mitch's optimism here, we do have both the federal government and the Ontario government wanting to take this forward. That combination has not occurred before. The timing is fantastic. with Mitch, there are hundreds of us supporting this. If we can do it, it's going to make a huge difference.
Chief Day.
Yeah, and I again want to be optimistic, but I also want to be a realist as well. And the fact of the matter is that as of May 1st, the hydro rates in Ontario are going to go up. And the reason why they're going to go up isn't because of demand. It's going to be because of the fact that there was less consumption over the last year. And who's going to bear that is the consumer. You know, one of the individuals in the audience, John Blackbird, just talked about the delivery charge. We also need to look at the reality of what is the current cost of energy in Ontario right now. From the provincial jurisdiction of Ontario and Quebec, it's very different. And we have an Ontario premier now who's looking outside of the province of Ontario to look at what the cost of energy is. So the reality is yes, in a perfect world, we've got this asset that's being planned in terms of the transmission line, but how is that going to be sustained? And what is the initial starting point? What is the economics behind energy? Some very complex questions.
While you have the floor, the Watay Energy Project. Tell this audience what that is.
Well, it's a transmission line in the north that is actually going to join 21 communities onto the grid. And this is the crux and the challenge that many communities are faced with, is the fact that they are not hooked onto a grid. You know, those 21 communities are looking to this opportunity to finally be able to have access to the grid, but we also see other communities you know, that are considering the costs and how will that get sustained. Industry's looking at this, government's looking at this, but we're also seeing a change, Steve, in that some of the microgrid solutions that will actually make communities sustainable among themselves should also be factored in.
Chris, I want to go to you on, we have here in the province of Ontario something called the IESO, Independent Electricity System Operator, which does just what the name says it is, and it plans for transmission lines and so on. I'm told that they are in the works right now, considering connecting 21 of 25 remote First Nations communities in this province that would, over time, say over 4 decades, save $1 billion at the end of the day. How?
Well, if you think of the cost of diesel power, if you look at a community like Mitch's, sometimes they have to fly diesel fuel on planes to be able to power it in the winter when the ice roads are not there. Or there may be communities where you have an ice road where you have to transport fuel 400 to 500 kilometers over time and space to get it there. That's very expensive. You have to do that year in and year out. That's a very expensive source of power. If you're able to reduce that cost of power by connecting it to the grid, which is much cheaper, then you start to see if the metrics work. Whether or not the northern transmission line in Ontario to connect 21 of the remote communities is going to save $1 billion, I don't know for sure yet. I don't think anyone does know for sure. That's the planning process underway. But there's a prospect that it could save a lot, and that's where they're looking at it hard. But the reason why it makes a difference is that transmission power, when you connect it versus transporting diesel, is cheaper. Do the numbers work? We're really getting our fingers crossed to hope so.
Mitchell, as you look at it, what do you think the impact on Casablanca could be if they can put this together?
Well, let me say this. I think the ratepayers of Ontario in this electricity market would want to support us getting connected to the grid. Right now, on diesel-generated power, it costs the distribution company 46 cents to generate 1 kilowatt hour. Our residents pay 8.8 cents for the first 1,000 kilowatts and then 11.3 cents for the next 1,500. Who's subsidizing that? The Ontario ratepayers are through a triple RP subsidy to Hydro One remote communities. So
it's in everybody's interest to make this happen.
That's right. And however, I do have a bit of caution in that I see in the grid-connected communities you pay time of day use billing, and you're penalized or your behavior is modified if you use electricity during certain hours at a higher rate. So you do it in the shoulders. That's going to come to our communities when we get connected to grid, and that concerns us.
Cynthia, if I've got this right, the Watay project that we've been talking about is owned by First Nations. Is that right? Is this the right type of model then in order to go forward, balancing Indigenous self-government with provincial and federal support?
Absolutely.
That's the way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, and in every single area, we're not just talking about this again. We are talking about health. You have to engage the Indigenous community in the conversation around the kind of health needs that they have. When we're talking about education, we have to have the First Nations communities, the Métis community, the Inuit community involved in the conversation about what kind of education they want to have for their kids. It doesn't matter what the conversation is. The fact of the matter is they have been left out of the conversation for the last 600 years. We're only finally coming to that conversation, and I think you're going to see a real change. And think of the kinds of things that we're going to continue to bring this country. We've already brought you food, and we've brought you medicines, and we've brought you clothing. We've brought you all kinds of things. We're going to continue to do that, and I think that we have to do that together.
Judith, in British Columbia, any sense about? Oh, go ahead.
In British Columbia, 125 out of 203 First Nations are involved in clean energy projects in some way, and that's from ownership all the way down to resource royalty sharing. Off-grid communities don't have that opportunity. They would like to be able to do a clean energy project that not only powers their community, but they could put on the grid and make money. But there's no opportunity because there's no grid there. The biggest issue that we face in British Columbia right now is opportunity. BC Hydro has decided, and the BC government has decided to build Site C that's going to have huge environmental impacts, and they don't want to buy clean energy, so they're purchasing just a few projects every year. And so those First Nations that were planning wind energy and biomass and, an industry that we've embraced in British Columbia has now been stymied to a few projects. And so that's also a problem. The demand for power, as Chief Day has said, has decreased in British Columbia. Demand side management, people putting in their own solar panels, and
Well, a downturn in the economy didn't help either.
no LNG projects going ahead, those kinds of things. So there's that reality as well that we have to face.
You raised an interesting question about options going forward, and Chris, let me go to you on this. Given your knowledge of the geography, what's kind of going to work the best? We're talking wind, solar, geothermal, what?
I'm going to say a really brilliant answer. It all depends. And it depends on what the geography and what the Mother Earth offers you. In some cases, you will have a solar resource. And the good news is that most places have some solar, and solar energy is getting cheaper. So you will see the main default position of renewable energy for remote communities be a solar storage combination. A few communities have a hydro resource, but not as many as you think. A few also have wind. In fact, what you're pointing to, Steve, in your question is that it's going to be an integrated approach that works. When you look at it in a remote community and you look at energy options, you look at all the options, and the first option is not to need power in the first place. You look at conservation, you look at efficiency, better homes, better facilities, and you climb that ladder to then look at your renewable options with what you're offered. Not all communities are going to be able to replace all of diesel power. In fact, many communities will still rely on some diesel power. But if we can maximize the amount of renewable energy along with efficiency, that's the solution we're looking for.
Mitchell, you've got wind where you are.
We have some demonstration turbines that Hydro One had put up in the past. And
Is it working?
Yeah, they generate 10 kilowatts. We're banking on solar. We've got a study on a solar farm, and we're going to proceed with that. We've got rooftop solar installation, so we are injecting some renewables into our microgrid.
But the wind that's getting you 10 kilowatts now, does that do much for you?
No. It's not even a dent at all in the system.
Not a dent, so that's
No,
why you're
it's
looking at other
demonstration.
options.
That's it.
Okay. Let's, you know what? Sheldon, let's play this clip right now. Eric Bombacino, who is the guy who's producing this program and regular producer on the agenda, last February went up to Pekanjicum to report on their energy circumstances up there. And we've got a little clip here about him talking about what reliable energy can and cannot do in terms of offerings to the community. Let's roll that clip.
The issues in Pekanjicum are multi-layered and complex. So there was a coroner's report on 16 youth suicides between 2006 and 2008 in Pekanjicum. And they looked at everything from colonialism to residential schools to that trauma that reverberates into the present. So you have infrastructure deficits, you have governance deficits, you have social issues, you have all these profoundly complex problems in suicide. And you have all this grief that rolls through the community, and it's this positive feedback loop. So energy is not a magic bullet. But what energy can allow is a platform for them to grow and build. So they have 90% unemployment in this community. They can't build any more businesses because the diesel generators are maxed out. They can't grow the northern store, which is where the only place you can get groceries in the community. They can't grow that. They can't hook up new homes to power, so even if they put the funding together to build them, they can't.
Energy is not the magic bullet, Eric says. Cynthia, agree?
Well, I agree. It's certainly absolutely essential, but it's not going to cure all of the problems. It's not going to make it all right.
It gets, get you down the road. Is that what I'm hearing?
It'll get you, absolutely. I think everybody has said absolutely get people down the road. It'll get people healthier. It'll provide children with the care they need, the schools they need. Yes.
Okay. I would like to, in our remaining moments here, finish up on something controversial as hell. Shall we? Here we go. Jonathan Kay, recently writing in a piece for the National Post called "Moving is the Only Hope for Communities Like Attawapiskat." In spite of everything we've talked about here today, he writes, "In most communities that have no jobs, people pack up and relocate. Whole regions of Atlantic Canada have fallen prey to this cycle of creative destruction. So has much of Detroit. While this process is sad and disruptive, it pushes families to areas where they can make a living and exist in dignity. But the Indian Act created a system that perversely discourages residents from leaving even the most appallingly impoverished reserves. This paradox lies at the heart of the cruelty we have inflicted on Aboriginal peoples, and it is why places such as Attawapiskat are doomed to exist in a hellish limbo." Judith, is he right?
No.
Tell me why.
He's nowhere close. What he misses is the point, is our connectedness to the land. You know, we all want to live in our home territories where we can visit our sacred sites, where we can exercise our rights to hunt, fish, trap, gather. We want to walk where our ancestors walked and pick the medicines and to manage our territories, be stewards of our territories. And you can't do that when you move away from the community. And that's critical. The Indian Act is irrelevant, but the government's always tried to remove us from our land because that's where we get our strength and our power. And that, I think, is what scares them.
Chief Day, many Irish people left their homeland because of a famine and came here. And you'd have to say that they're all better off for having done so. And some people will wonder why that's not an example for Indigenous peoples in this country.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think that's just a general example. However, when you look at the history of Canada, we have a situation here where there's unfinished business and treaties. We were not a conquered people. We entered into legally binding agreements called treaties. And I would actually ask the viewers to consider this, that we are on the cusp of actually a new frontier. We are in transformative change in terms of climate change, world economy. And basically, we are going to see a change that occurs where technology is going to become so much more advanced and prevalent. Innovation is key. These people in the north don't have to move, and I believe you can create economies in the north with transportation networks that are electrified. You get the internet into the north. You create food security, equalization in terms of access to wealth and resource, and new governance systems. I really believe that the north, where these communities are, and the fact that they are rich in resources as well as having a carbon sink, I believe that this is a new and positive change in the future.
Cynthia, can you still get your strength from the land when it looks like there is so much despair in the land?
Well, I don't think there's despair in the land. People do leave the communities and they go back and forth on a regular basis. I mean, our people are highly adaptable. They adapt to all of the kinds of things that are around them. They move into the cities, they move back to the reserve. I live in Thunder Bay right now, but I've also come from the reserve for the last 12, 14 years. It doesn't really matter. That's not the point here, and I think that that's important that we understand that what we're seeing in the communities is something that has been created by external force and agency. And when we have the capacity to deal with that ourselves, it works. So that's what we have to do. You're not going to drive those people off the land. That is their land. Resource revenue sharing.
Mitchell, I'll give you the last 30 seconds on this.
Thank you. All of time in our communities has been marked by experiences and places on the land. All of our ancestors have returned back to our homelands. Is that the only solution that our society can come up with, is to displace us? Our country is accepting refugees from around the world, and now they're looking to displace us. Where would we go? Why would we go? It's not going to happen.
That's where we're going to leave it tonight. Mitchell, you get the last word.
Thank you.
Mr. Director, can you go to a wide shot of our panel here, please, so we can thank, from left to right, Mitchell Dybo, Christopher Henderson, Cynthia Wesley Eskimo, Isidore Day, and Judith Sayers, who came a very long way from British Columbia to be with us today. I hope this audience will join me in thanking our 5 guests for coming from near and far to help us out with this program tonight. Thanks so much, everybody.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.